Hello, this is DC Hammer, and this is the DC Hammer Show. So today, again, is Open Mind Friday. We have some breaking news. We understand that there are some issues going on over in the UK. We know that Julian Assange still resides within the Ecuadorian embassy in London, but apparently there may be something brewing over there. We don't know if he's going to be freed or if he's going to be arrested or something in between. So I saw a YouTube video the other day. It was an interview with Cassandra Fairbanks, who's a journalist that had been allowed to go over to the Ecuadorian embassy in London and interview, or at least that was supposed to be what was happening, interview Julian Assange, who had been the founder of WikiLeaks and has been held up in the Ecuadorian embassy since 2012. After he left Sweden, he had gone there and had been accused of rape by a woman and was going to be arrested and tried for rape in Sweden. He left Sweden under some less than fully legal reasons, ended up getting asylum in the Ecuadorian embassy in London, and he's been there ever since. And even though that woman that made the charges against him for rape way back when in Sweden has recanted on her testimony and has said she was not raped by Julian Assange, and those charges were dropped, since then he's had to hold out in the Ecuadorian embassy in London because, again, they gave him asylum, and both the UK and the United States were putting pressure on Ecuador for him to be released and he would be arrested. The UK was stating that the reason for the arrest would be that he kind of was a bail jumper from what took place in Sweden. And the United States, both administrations, this started during the Obama administration and has now spilled over to the Trump administration, and both attorney generals, back Loretta Lynch and then with Jeff Sessions, that Department of Justice of the United States continue to say that if they got their mitts on Julian Assange, they wouldn't protect him and let him go free. They would actually arrest him and file charges against him for activities that had been involved with before. So as the current events unfold, what we're hearing is there was a tweet that came out from WikiLeaks, apparently a highly placed tweet. In other words, somebody that released this tweet on Twitter from WikiLeaks indicated that the Ecuadorian embassy may, as of today, expel Julian Assange from that embassy, and then it'll be interesting to see what's going to happen as far as the UK's response. The UK, the United Kingdom, has had London police surrounding that facility, waiting for him to poke his head out like a gopher, Julian Assange, and they would nab him and arrest him. And at the same time, I'm sure our spooks, I'm sure CIA and other operatives from the United States have been in that same area waiting to get their hands on him as well. But it appears that from the reporting from Cassandra Fairbanks the other day, she was saying the most recent visit that she made to the Ecuadorian embassy, that she was searched, she was treated in a way that was obviously unfriendly by the Ecuadorian staff, that was significantly different from any of her other previous appearances when she went to interview Assange before. She said that as she attempted to meet with him, she had a prearranged 2-hour meeting scheduled with Assange. That did not take place. She was taken to a conference room. It was obvious the conference room was bugged. They were not going to allow her to have a private meeting, which was happening previously with Julian Assange, and Sean Hannity from Fox News had gone over there and met with Assange at times before. They were not going to allow her to have the same privileges. And as Julian Assange attempted to enter that conference room and talk to Cassandra Fairbanks, they grabbed him, the Ecuadorian staff. They then were trying to body search him. Cassandra Fairbanks was in the conference room and could not see what was going on, but she could hear what was going on. She said a quote-unquote fight ensued between the Ecuadorian officials and Julian Assange, and he was becoming agitated. They were becoming insistent, and that they were going to frisk him. They was going to do like a body search, and the interview, again, it was supposed to be 2 hours long, did not even take place. She was allowed a few minutes with Julian Assange. Very little was accomplished in that, and then she was escorted out the building. He was taken back to wherever he stays within the Ecuadorian embassy itself. And she got the sense that this was a week or two ago when she met with Assange over there, this most recent time. She got the sense that something was going on, that his terms of stay within the embassy were changing and it was becoming more uncomfortable. And now we've seen this tweet that indicates that events are unfolding.
Well, why would the Ecuadorian people or embassy people suddenly treat him like that? I mean, are they thinking he's sneaking secrets out? I mean, what kind of secrets could the Ecuadorians have?
The bad boys are putting pressure on Ecuador, threatened with financial ruin if they don't get rid of this guy. If they obviously, Assange chose Ecuador because they would not legally extradite him, but there are powers that be that have the financial resources to put the thumbscrews financially to the whole nation of Ecuador unless they do what these deep staters want.
Let's throw in a suitcase of greenbacks on top. Offer he can't refuse. That is it.
Yeah, and Troll Whisperer pointed me to this live feed that's going on, a YouTube channel called Ruptly. It has a camera outside the Ecuadorian embassy, and they are filming live what is going on. And right now, there are protesters out there, only a handful, doesn't seem to be a lot. There have been, as I've been watching, there have been some cars pulling up, somebody going in probably with regular business to the Ecuadorian embassy, going in, punching the button, being allowed access into the building. But out in front, there's a handful of protesters that have signs, Free Assange. One of them is actually sticking up for Chelsea Manning. I don't want to comment too much about that one. But they've got a truck that passes back and forth between the camera and the Ecuadorian embassy, that the side of the truck has a free speech sign and Free Assange on it. So right now there doesn't seem to be a whole lot going on. The protesters are outside, appear to be pro-Assange, but it's pretty quiet at the embassy, but there is an expectation that something may happen today.
If this was a movie, there would be an underground way to get him out.
I remember when Dr. Corsi actually speculated that had happened. There were people that thought that he had been taken out. In retrospect, obviously it didn't happen, but that was probably a story that was intended to divert people, the bad guys looking in other locations.
Yeah, that goes back to the fall of 2018. There was a court action taking place in the court in Northern Virginia, and there was speculation that Assange had been spirited out of the embassy and was being held in some private, secure facility to appear before that court, and that did not happen.
It was rendition, by a Navy ship or something in extraterritorial waters. I mean, there were all sorts of... Where's Waldo?
He's a central player in many regards. Like, I'll tell you what, if I were Hillary Clinton and I had a list of 5 or 10 people that I wanted to pay back, I would say he would probably be in the top 3 to 5. So he's
define payback.
Do I really need to?
Arkansas?
I'll throw up a list of a link to the Clinton death list. How's that? Just so people have an idea.
CBC Clinton. What?
Body count.
No, it would be the other thing too is it would be naive to assume that that Assange doesn't have a poison pill somewhere. So maybe what's going on now is just an impulse to just settle this thing. Just get it out in the open, resolve the issue. I know it's a controversial topic, but I've always wondered about the Seth Rich case. There was, as is suggested, a link between the DNC leak and Seth Rich. I don't see why Julian Assange couldn't be compelled to testify in a murder investigation about that, especially in revealing sources. Seth Rich is deceased, so Julian Assange's long-standing resistance to revealing sources, I don't know if that covers the deceased.
If you think about it, then all an enemy of the truth would have to do is knock off anybody they suspect of communicating the truth to WikiLeaks. So I would say that because that's a possibility, it was well within reason and even almost a mandate that even if somebody is killed, as possibly very likely happened with Seth Rich, and if he was a WikiLeaks source, then it would be important as a precedent for WikiLeaks never to reveal that source.
Yeah, but it's interesting when you go back to the period of time when Sean Hannity made the trip over to London and interviewed Julian Assange, and on more than one occasion during that interview, prompted Assange to try to get him to admit that it was Seth Rich that downloaded, had him on a thumb drive, that took him to this intermediary. They met in a garage somewhere. Seth Rich supposedly passed that thumb drive over to this operative, and then shortly thereafter, WikiLeaks had the emails, and Seth Rich was murdered. And Julian Assange continued to say that he could not divulge sources. They will never do that. But he also made some twisty references to Seth Rich and said how that's terrible that a person like Seth Rich would be murdered. And later on, WikiLeaks came out and offered, I believe it was a $25,000 reward for any information leading to the arrest of the people that had murdered Seth Rich.
Going back to Troll Whisperer, if he tries to do the right thing and come out, it's very likely he'll end up dead in prison.
Well, the thing is, the British, it's just seeing how they behaved during this Russiagate thing, is they're the anti-Trump side pretty strongly. So I bet they win the race. He's already there in that country, and whatever is going to happen is going to pass through them first. And I don't think there's a lot of interplay between the current regime in Britain and Trump's administration.
In my perfect world, what would happen would be Assange would be extradited to the U.S. The White Hats would be in charge of a grand jury investigation, and Julian Assange would give a secret testimony to the grand jury, which would be protected all the way, and he would not be in any way publicly revealing his sources, but there would be grand jury evidence that could proceed in the murder case for Seth Rich.
Well, it appears to be a race, and it probably, this thing's been going on for so long, but just ironically, it's about a week or so after the Mueller investigation essentially collapses, so it doesn't seem like that's a coincidence. So if anything that Julian Assange pertaining to Seth Rich does come into play, then now would be the time to get that papered over before the momentum builds and before the Justice Department really wakes up from their post-Mueller restrictions, because they're still sort of digesting that whole issue. But it's just ironic that now it's right up front.
You know, it's interesting, the question about why now? Why all of a sudden, after months and years of captivity, or whatever you want to call it, the asylum by Julian Assange resulting in his forced stay unless he wants to be grabbed and prosecuted within that Ecuadorian embassy in London. In February of this year, there were some documents that were released, and it was released by WikiLeaks. Now, Assange is saying he no longer controls or has anything to do with WikiLeaks. He is not the editor in charge, so it was somebody else's running WikiLeaks, according to Julian Assange. So WikiLeaks published some papers that involved the INA, what was it? It's an investment corporation. The INA Investment Corporation, it's an offshore tax haven created by the brother of Ecuadorian President Lenin Moreno. And apparently information was released, and that twisted Moreno's head in a circle. And so he became extremely upset with WikiLeaks. And apparently part of the reason for the heightened tension between Ecuador and Julian Assange within the last couple months has been over the fact that WikiLeaks released those documents, shines the light on what Moreno may be doing in nefarious activities with INA investment. It's been called the INA Papers. That's what they're calling this dump now, INA Papers. And it appears that they may be taking that out on Assange.
That would be foolish on WikiLeaks' part. He happens to be in the Ecuadorian embassy, and let's piss off some high-ranking Ecuadorians. That would be just foolish. So I'm with Troll Whisperer on this. I think the timing is perfect. I think the deep state is scared and running, and hey, let's tie up loose ends.
Is the deep state running WikiLeaks now?
Oh, that could be too, I guess.
I think there was evidence to that effect in the time when the song was saying, and it was, I believe, if memory was a Q post that basically said as much, that WikiLeaks at this point can't be trusted. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I remember something like that.
No, I remember it too.
Yeah. So it appears that there isn't much going on in front of the embassy in London. There's no protesters anymore, if you trust the Rupley feed to be truly live streaming. There's still a couple signs. There's a couple people wandering by. It appears that they're all headed out to get something to eat, or they're otherwise distracted. But there's nothing cooking really right there in the front of the Ecuadorian embassy. And so I want to thank Abigail, Arrow, Bandit, and Troll Whisperer for participation in the recording today. And I want to thank everybody for watching and listening today. And God bless. And now the DC Hammer Show is available as an audio podcast. Just go to Podcast Garden or iTunes and search for DC Hammer or News Narrative Analysis Associates, NNAA.